Hi, everyone. We are going to take a look at Chapter 5 on lipids. So, in this chapter, we will continue the theme that it's important to focus on the type and the source when we're concerned about health. And that holds very true for lipids, just as it did for carbohydrates. Certainly, there are reasons to discuss them all as one category, and some of the common characteristics are here. They are all high in calories, density wise. They include triglycerides, phospholipids, and sterols, and they don't dissolve easily in water. But when we dig into the concept map, that's when we see differences. So you can see structurally a difference in the three major types of lipids: phospholipids, triglycerides, and sterols. And please note that triglycerides are the fats and oils, and that is the major type of lipid we discuss as being important both in our body and also in food. And we will discuss saturated versus unsaturated. I'm going to show you a video that does a nice job of explaining why we need to focus on type more than total, perhaps. But before we do, here's some very brief bits of information. So we know that triglycerides are fats and oils. They consist of 3 fatty acids bonded to a glycerol. Those fatty acids are very important in determining the health effect of that fat or oil, with saturated fatty acids generally being less healthy or unhealthy and solid at room temperature, and unsaturated fats typically being more healthy and liquid at room temperature. Also note that saturated fats tend to come from foods of animal origin, and unsaturated fats more from plant origin, although there are some exceptions to the rule. When we talk about coconut oil, palm kernel oil, they are plants, but they are more saturated. Okay, so this is a nice little review and explanation here.
We work with people inside and outside our industry. It doesn't matter where good ideas come from, as long as they help patients.
Olive oil is 100% fat. There's nothing else in it. Pancake mix, on the other hand, is only about 11% fat. And yet, olive oil is good for you, and pancake mix is not. Why is that? As it turns out, the amount of fat we eat doesn't impact our weight or our cholesterol or our risk of heart disease nearly as much as what kind of fat we eat. But let's back up. What is fat? If we were to zoom in on a salmon, which is a fatty fish, past the organs, past the tissues, into the cells, we would see that the stuff we call fat is actually made up of molecules called triglycerides, and they are not all alike. Here's one example. Those 3 carbons on the left, that's glycerol. Now you can think of that as the backbone that holds the rest of the molecule together. The 3 long chains on the right are called fatty acids, and it's subtle differences in the structures of these chains that determine whether a fat is, let's say, solid or liquid, whether or not it goes rancid quickly, and, most importantly, how good or how bad it is for you. Let's take a look at some of these differences. One is length. Fatty acids can be short or long. Another, more important difference is the type of bond between the carbon atoms. Some fatty acids have only single bonds. Others have both single and double bonds. Fatty acids with only single bonds are called saturated, and those with one or more double bonds are called unsaturated. Now, most unsaturated fats are good for you, while saturated fats are bad for you in excess. For saturated fats, the story pretty much ends there, but not for unsaturated fats. The double bonds in these molecules have kind of a weird property. They're rigid. So that means that there are 2 ways to arrange every double bond. The first is like this, where both hydrogens are on the same side and both carbons are on the same side. The second way is like this, Now the hydrogens and carbons are on opposite sides of the double bond. Now, even though both of these molecules are made up of exactly the same building blocks, they are two completely different substances and they behave completely differently inside of us. The configuration on the left is called cis, which you've probably never heard of. The one on the right is called trans, and you probably have heard of trans fats before. They don't go rancid, they're more stable during deep frying, and they can change the texture of foods in ways that other fats just can't. They're also terrible for your health, by far worse than saturated fat, even though technically they're a type of unsaturated fat. Now, I know that seems crazy, but your body doesn't care what a molecule looks like on paper. All that matters is the 3D shape, where the molecule fits, where it doesn't, and what pathways it interferes with. So how do you know if a food has trans fat in it? Well, the only sure way to know is if you see the words partially hydrogenated in the ingredients list. Don't let nutrition labels or advertising fool you. The FDA allows manufacturers to claim that their products contain, quote, 0 grams of trans fat, even if they actually have up to half a gram per serving. But there are no hard and fast rules about how small a serving can be, and that means you'll have to rely on seeing those key words, partially hydrogenated, because that's how trans fats are made, by partially hydrogenating unsaturated fats. So let's go back to our olive oil and pancake mix from before. Olive oil is 100% fat. Pancake mix is only 11% fat. But olive oil is mostly unsaturated fat, and it has no trans fat at all. On the other hand, more than half the fat in pancake mix is either saturated or trans fat. And so even though olive oil has 10 times as much fat as pancake mix, it's healthy for you, whereas pancake mix is not. Now, I'm not trying to pick on pancake mix. There are lots of foods with this type of fat profile. The point is this: it's not how much fat you eat, it's what kind of fat. And what makes a particular fat healthy or unhealthy is its shape.
So many gems in that little video, so feel free to watch that again. Cis and trans fatty acids were discussed, and I think discussed very clearly. Trans fatty acids are the worst type of fat for us. So we want to be aware that 0 grams trans fat does not mean trans fat free necessarily. We need to look into that ingredient label. Essential fatty acids are another type of unsaturated fat, and there are 2 families here, omega-3 and omega-6. We require these in our diet in small amounts, and they are important for making eicosanoids that are regulatory compounds. Now, I want to say something about omega-3s and omega-6. Clearly, both are healthy. When you replace saturated or trans fats with either type, you have a positive impact on health for sure. But the ratio also seems to be important in that omega-3 fatty acids, the types of eicosanoids that are produced from them, tend to lower blood pressure, act in an anti-inflammatory fashion, and thin the blood. These are all effects that are positive in terms of decreasing your risk for chronic diseases. So when you look at the sources of these fatty acids, the American population tends to get plenty of the omega-6, but not enough of the omega-3. And we need to focus on adding more omega-3s into the diet. And we'll talk about fish as one source of that, but certainly there are plant sources as well. Fats and oils are made up of a mix of fatty acids. That's important to keep in mind. I'll tell you when this becomes very clear. You may be a vegan vegetarian who plans a very healthy diet, but when you see your all reports report for your NCP, you notice that you've got some saturated fats in there. Well, that's because even the healthiest of the oils, and you see that here, have some saturated fatty acids. So the goal for saturated fat is not zero or close to zero as it is for trans fats. The goal is less than 10% of calories, which turns out to be somewhere around 22 grams of saturated fat daily. Here are the sources of fat. This is useful, but it doesn't focus in on type, which is problematic. Okay, there's a big difference between the makeup and the health effect of butter versus olive oil. There's a big difference between an avocado and a berry pie. So keep in mind, whenever you look at fat content, more importantly is to focus on the type of fat. We haven't said a whole lot about cholesterol for good reason. Cholesterol is one of the types of lipids, the sterols. It's found in animal source foods, never in plant foods naturally, unless you put cheese on top of your broccoli. You see that organ meats tend to be very high in cholesterol as well. Now we're going to get back to cholesterol, and we're going to talk about the dietary guidelines for it a little bit later. All right, so what about fat digestion? Fat digestion is more complex than the digestion of carbohydrates. I would refer you to this figure. It does a wonderful job of talking about fat digestion. And you can see that the small intestine is the primary part of the GI tract where most of the digestion takes place. But read through this bit by bit. And there's a nice figure, 511, that also illustrates the absorption of these fatty acids. And this becomes interesting and important because the larger products of fat digestion, the long chain fatty acids, cannot mix with water-based solutions, which is blood. And so they have to move into the lymphatic system before they reach the blood circulatory system. Be sure to read through this as well. This takes us to the transports of fats through the body. Okay, the larger fats cannot mix with water. Unlike the monosaccharides, they don't move into the capillaries, the bloodstream, and head to the liver. They do not mix with water, so they have to be bundled up into lipoproteins and move through the lymphatic system. Now, why this becomes soluble is because of the protein on the coat of this structure. But why it's important health-wise has to do with cardiovascular disease. Cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death in North America for both men and women, by the way. Keep that in mind. Number one cause of death for women as well. Women lag behind in terms of when they develop heart disease, much due to different hormones. However, it is the leading cause of death. And if you look at the numbers here, they are incredible, right? Now we are going to look at a short video on the development of atherosclerosis, but I did want to point out another figure that you'll find in your textbook that describes this step by step. And I also want to mention here that the beginning of this process results from an injury to the artery wall. And that injury can occur due to a number of different reasons, which are listed here. Okay. So let's take a look at this.
Atherosclerosis is the buildup of fatty deposits, including cholesterol in the walls of arteries. It's a major cause of cardiovascular disease, including stroke and heart attack, and contributes to the death of around 70 million people worldwide every year. This short presentation illustrates the key stages in its development and its main impact on cardiovascular health. Cholesterol is a natural, fat-like substance and is essential to health. However, too much cholesterol in your blood can be harmful. Cholesterol is produced in the liver, but can also be found in certain foods, such as those high in saturated fats. There are many types of cholesterol. The main type involved in atherosclerosis is called LDL-C, or bad cholesterol. Another type of cholesterol, HDL-C, is called good cholesterol. It's important to increase HDL-C as well as reduce LDL-C when treating high cholesterol. A normal artery wall consists of 3 main layers: a thin, smooth layer that lines the inside of the artery to help blood flow, a muscular, elastic layer that helps the artery pulse to push blood around the body, and a tough outer layer to protect the artery. The exact cause of atherosclerosis is not known, but several factors, including smoking, high blood pressure, diabetes, and high cholesterol, are known to damage the smooth lining of the artery and contribute to atherosclerosis. Once this layer is damaged, the bad cholesterol, LDL-C, can get into the wall of the artery. There are 4 key stages in the development of atherosclerosis. The body tries to defend against the invasion of LDL-C into the artery walls by activating specialized cells called macrophages to consume the LDL-C. They become enlarged cholesterol-enriched cells called foam cells that are embedded in the vessel wall. The accumulation of foam cells can be seen by the presence of fatty streaks in the vessel wall. As the fatty streaks grow, the body tries to protect the artery from them by surrounding them in a fibrous capsule. At this stage, the growth is called a plaque. As the plaque gets bigger, the body tries to preserve the blood flow through the artery. The plaque expands into the elastic layer, which stretches in order to keep the opening of the artery the same. If the plaque continues to grow, its expansion will eventually intrude on the inner opening of the vessel, as the elastic layer cannot stretch anymore. This reduces the ability of blood to get through the artery. At this stage, physical symptoms such as angina may appear. Also, over time, calcium may be deposited in the plaque, making it hard and inflexible. This reduces the ability of the artery to expand to increase blood flow when needed, for example during exercise. As the plaque grows into the artery opening, it squeezes the blood through an ever smaller gap. The resulting increase in pressure at the narrowing can damage the capsule covering the plaque, which may then rupture, resulting in a blood clot that can completely block the artery. Depending on the location of the blockage, the consequences, such as stroke or heart attack, may be severe and could be life-threatening. Atherosclerosis is progressive, and it can take many years before symptoms appear. But some people can have no symptoms even with extensive atherosclerosis and are at risk from sudden death. The symptoms depend on the site of the affected artery. In the heart, it can manifest as chest pains, angina. In the brain, as a type of mini-stroke called transient ischemic attacks. And to the legs as a cramp-like condition called intermittent claudication, which can result in amputation of the limb. If a plaque ruptures, the resulting blood clot may block the artery and cause a heart attack or a stroke, which can often be fatal. Atherosclerosis may cause the artery wall to weaken, causing it to bulge under the pressure from the blood. This bulge, called an aneurysm, can rupture, and the resulting bleed, called a hemorrhage, can be fatal. We hope, after this presentation, that you understand how the bad cholesterol LDL-C contributes to cardiovascular disease and atherosclerosis, and what that means for your health. We also hope you appreciate why always taking your medication, as prescribed by your doctor, is so important in maintaining low LDL-C and high HDL-C in order to reduce your cardiovascular risk.
And your textbook does talk about medication, but let's start where we should start, and that's to look at risk factors. Some of these are not modifiable, and you see this as you get older, males more than females, and heredity play a part in your risk for heart disease, cardiovascular disease, but a lot are modifiable. More factors are modifiable, which means things like quitting smoking, managing your blood pressure and your cholesterol, being more active for sure, and decreasing body fat, as well as managing blood sugar, can decrease your risk for heart disease. Read through this list of modifiable risk factors. I think it's very important to note that diabetes virtually guarantees development of cardiovascular disease. We talked about the metabolic syndrome. Well, this is a place where those two chronic diseases are often found together. So what do we do? What do we recommend? I've got a couple of slides that focus on this. This one is very simple. Basically, they eat food, mostly plants, not too much. And you can see here limiting those nutrient poor foods, those ultra processed foods, those foods that are high in saturated fat, trans fat, and sodium. Here we have a more extensive list of specific changes, and very important to note that you can take these one by one. Small steps matter. So find a change or help your client find a change that they feel they can do easily. It's nice to have some wins and to feel better with some of these small changes and then to move on. And a little bit of a list here, but this brings to mind, once again, that theme, focus on type. Saturated and trans fats are the worst type for our health. So eating less of the foods rich in those and choosing replacements that are low in those, very important. All right, so here I promised we'd return to cholesterol intake. Decades ago, we spent a lot of time talking about dietary cholesterol, but what we have found through research is that the amount of cholesterol in our diet does not impact our blood cholesterol much. It has little impact. Saturated and trans fat, added sugars, overall calorie consumption and obesity, lack of physical activity, all those things have a greater impact. You can see that your body, your liver makes cholesterol, and most of it is made endogenously. So we've kind of lightened the focus on dietary cholesterol before of that. And the recent dietary guidelines don't talk much or at all about cholesterol. For that reason and others, in that eggs tend to be inexpensive, a rich source of nutrients, we've also lessened up on the avoid eggs at all costs type of advice. God, I think this is the last video I'll show you today, but I do have a video that explains the rationale for that.
Right in.
IBM is helping manufacturers do both. Using AI on a hybrid cloud helps them automate the little things so they can focus on the next big thing.
Nice work, guys.
A reader asks well.
What's the recommendation on eating eggs?
Advice on the egg, specifically on
An egg a day is good for you too.
Most recently, the American Heart Association dropped its recommendations limiting cholesterol consumption. For your information, a whole egg with the yolk has about 200 milligrams. Studies have shown that eating 5 or 6 eggs over the course of a week doesn't raise the risk of heart disease or stroke in healthy adults. And in fact, some doctors point out that the benefits of the nutrients of the yolk, like protein, vitamin B12, riboflavin, folate, and vitamin D, may counter the worries about cholesterol. And on top of that, it's likely way more healthy than processed meat or refined carbohydrates. So maybe, next time you'll replace that less healthy breakfast option with an egg.
Still good advice, even though that was produced in 2015. I think what happened when we outlawed eggs nutritionally is that a lot of people moved to high sugar breakfast. And we now know that that was a very poor replacement and in fact has a worse health impact. Okay. When we're talking about positive changes and healthful fatty acids, we can't avoid talking about the omega-3 fatty acids. The recommendation is to consume seafood 1 to 2 times per week. These omega-3s promote heart health and brain health. They decrease inflammation. The one thing they also do is they can thin your blood. So you have to be careful about excessive intake, primarily through supplements more than food sources. But you do have to be careful of that, especially if you're taking other substances which can thin your blood. This is the first time we've talked about supplements, and I'm not an anti-supplement person. I take a few myself, but you have to do your research and you have to be cautious and you have to use evidence-based science when you do choose supplements. Here are some examples of the omega-3s in a number of different fish. Okay, you can see here that salmon, especially the Atlantic salmon, is quite high. If you like anchovies, they're up there with sardines as well. What about coconut oil? Now, your textbook takes a pretty negative stance on coconut oil. It is highly saturated, and that is not debatable. What we see in coconut oil and milk fat, by the way, is that the saturated fatty acids are shorter in length. And it appears that they might not be as harmful health-wise, but they certainly don't, they're not healthy. Okay, so it's not like using olive oil or other vegetable oils or the fat in fatty fishes. It might be less harmful than other saturated fats, but still something that you should use in moderation only. And here we have another look at what this heart healthy plate is. I did want to mention a heart healthy diet is good for all of us. The concepts, the principles of it across the board as far as keeping us healthy, both brain and body. And since heart disease is the #1 killer for men and women, this is a diet really that would do all of us well. The Mediterranean diet, and that's what we're going to finish with today, is another dietary pattern that's shown to be very healthy for the heart. I want to show you this quick little video that takes a look at how to apply this. But keep in mind that you can apply the principles of these healthy diets to a number of different ethnic and cultural foods. So the goal should be to find foods that you love, that you enjoy, that bring you pleasure, but fit into some of these healthier patterns. Okay, a lot of videos today, but they're short and fun.
If every moment of your life is on display, it's time for SelectBlinds.com. Right now, save 30% on all.
Okay, so you might have seen something there that looked yummy to you, but maybe not. And if you did not, oh, let me stop the recording now.